So if you're listening to this live, you'll be able to pick those CEUs up today after taking that survey. Please just take it once. It'll pop up after we're done. And if you're listening this on the future on demand, make sure to follow the instructions either from US GBC or we have the instructions from our YouTube channel as well. So make sure you are following those instructions on our YouTube channel down below. There we go. And so you can see some of those different instructions right there. And then questions are coming in. We got some time here for questions. I see quite a bit. And before we get to those, huge thanks to all of our sponsors, our members, our board of directors. Huge thanks to everyone who allows us to do what we do. Shrinergy for on the go and in your house backup power generation from solar for not if but when the grid goes down. T-stud structurally insulated framing systems that save energy and money behind the walls. Panasonic ventilation to meet all your ventilation needs from bare minimum to smart. And Mitsubishi Electric for all electric net zero energy heating and cooling through heat pump air source technology. So, you know, one of the questions that I wanted to go over just real quick is, and a few people are asking is, can you define how you say small when you say small, and if you want to be beholden to a square footage, you know, what would that be? And if not, I could understand that too.
Okay, well, the criteria for this last book that I just did, Downsize, the houses had to be under 2,000 square feet. The book that I did prior, there were some very tiny houses, but I did have one or two houses that were a little larger. They were about 2,500 square feet. But in this book, I just was keeping to 2,000 square feet, and most of the houses were under that. So I think small is, you know, dependent on where you live and, you know, who you are. But I felt like that was a reasonable amount to consider as small. It is certainly smaller than the national average.
Yeah, definitely. So another question I had was, just a second here, I apologize, my computer is locking up, so I had all these written down. The question I had was, let's see here. Well, I think I remembered off the top of my head. Let's get into maybe ADUs real quick, because I do remember that one off the top of my head. Define ADUs? And the reason I ask is, you know, is it just something that is in like on the site, or, you know, some people I've heard define ADUs as in the basement as well, but I always thought, you know, I'm not quite sure that's an ADU. It has to be something attached on the site. But what kind of definitions have you seen out there for that?
Okay, so an ADU is any accessory dwelling unit that's on site. So it can be over the garage. It can be where the garage was that was transformed. It can be in a basement. So wherever you have an extra dwelling on your lot is an ADU. So there are lots of ways to do that. But again, a lot of the municipalities have particular rules for where they are or who can live there. So the house that I showed you in Canada, in BC, it had to be a family member who lived in the ADU. In other areas, people are renting, building an ADU and renting it out. And actually, somebody just contacted me recently. I can't remember where they were from, but they said there's a company today that will build the ADU for you on your property, and they will split the rent with you once it's built. So, um, that may work in some places, but not in others. So, anybody that is interested in building an ADU or transforming part of their house to an ADU, they need to find out what the local rules are. And there are still some areas that don't, some states and municipalities that don't allow ADUs.
Yeah, that does make sense. And then how do you and on that note, actually, how do we get municipalities to buy into these ADUs? What is the selling point? Have you been involved in any of those conversations at all?
I think that there are a lot of areas in the country that are just so dense, and people want to live there and they can't afford it. And so by building ADUs, they are allowing more people to come into the community without building high rises. I think a lot of areas, people don't want high rises and multiplexes. And so this is a way to add some density and at a reasonable rate without having to uh, build large buildings in that area.
Mhm.
And I think that's the main motivation. I think there's a lot of areas that people want to live. Kids grow up in an area and then they want to live in that location, and it's just too expensive. They can't afford it. And so if there's an ADU on a property, it gives them the opportunity to stay in the community. Another one of the houses that I have in my book is a granny flat, and this
Hmm.
grandmother, she lost her husband, and she was moving around from her kids from one house to the other, and one of her grandsons built this ADU where his garage was, and it just gave the grandmother a very comfortable place to live, and it also gave the grandchildren a built-in babysitter. So um, these can work out really well for both the homeowner and the people that need a place to live.
Um, on the energy efficiency side, we know that obviously a right-sized home, by definition, has less demand for heating and cooling. However, when it comes to code compliance, code is typically focused on thicker walls, especially, which can be problematic for smaller homes because the thicker a wall has to be, the more square footage gets eaten up. But even though we know these smaller homes are inherently going to use less energy, have you seen any code officials be willing to have different conversations when we approach smaller homes by saying, look, we understand by having less volume, you're going to have less demand. Therefore, we're going to go easier on you on some of your thermal envelope requirements, especially in light of the fact that they might chip away into your smaller space.
I didn't never heard from anybody that was an issue. Actually, I think all of the people that built these houses, or I'd say most of them, um, were very knowledgeable about how to build an envelope that was very efficient without being terribly thick. They just used great insulation, and they just built a very efficient envelope. So I don't think that any of them had particularly thick walls. I think that they just managed to build them so that they were efficient either way. And a lot of them had the concrete floors um, and very efficient windows and good foundations. And a lot of the houses had a blower door test so that they can find out where the air was coming in. So I think it was just really smart architects designing great envelopes, and I don't think it was an issue. I didn't hear from anybody that they had to build particularly thick walls. I think you can build a very efficient envelope without building really thick walls.
Um, Here's a great question, just based on the homes you've seen. And maybe you don't have any study, but just anecdotally, what's the percentage of these types of homes on, of new construction, versus renovations?
Oh, most of the houses in the book are new houses. I believe there's only about 2 or 3 renovations. A lot of the people just wanted to start from scratch, but the people that did do renovations just wanted a different style. They wanted more efficiency. And so there are a few of those, but not so many. There's a house that I have in Washington, D.C. that was really unique. They took an industrial house, an industrial property um, that was in a not so um, uh, residential area of town, and they managed to make it very livable and efficient, and it's really quite lovely. And the area where they built it is really un undergoing a whole resurgence, and so it was a good decision on their part, but it's quite charming. So there are several, and they were all quite interesting projects.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Have you seen anyone using like mobile projectors in place of TVs to save even more space? Is that something that could work?
I haven't seen that with anybody. I think the younger people are watching less television, to be honest. I think a lot of the kids or millennials are watching TV on their computers, and
Yeah, that goes along with that. Yep.
a lot of the older people were not as interested in television. They were very active. They were into bicycling, or they were a lot of them were still working, and they were into socializing more. So I don't think that television was a main function in their house for any of them. I didn't see any of those kind of projectors, to be honest.
Um, Tell us a little bit more about resale value on these. Is there any concern about them losing resale value and or having a hard time maybe even getting a traditional mortgage? Or on the flip side, do you think these kinds of homes are going to have a higher value, or what have you seen out there?
I think that the smaller houses are going to have more value going forward because, as I said earlier on, I think a lot of the young people have tremendous school loans, and um, they're having fewer children. They don't want such big houses. I think some of the houses that the boomers are moving out of are difficult for people to sell because they don't want and they can't afford those houses. So I think that the smaller houses are becoming more valuable, and a lot of these houses were just in beautiful locations, whether they were in town or in the country. They were lovely spots and they were really well done. And so I think that the value is going to definitely be there. When I was selling my house, I had quite a large house in town, and I was looking on the days that people were looking at my house. I would go into town and look at some of the houses that were selling, and I found houses that were in town were a fraction of the size of my house, and they were more money because people want to live close to town, and having a lot of land is not necessarily a priority for a lot of people, and they want to be, in a lot of cases, they want to be close to town and different amenities so that they don't have to drive so much.
Great. And just real quick, we do have some time for more questions. We have some more. I see probably 5 or 6 of you all clicking the raise hand button. So I'm not really sure what you all are trying to say there. So please, if you have a specific thing you're trying to say, just type it into the comments, and we'll get you connected there. Or if you're just trying to give us a high five, that's pretty cool too. So I've heard that universal design in some ways can actually contradict of the smaller home, right size home movement. And that's typically in the sense where you're trying to, widen hallways and widen spaces, which increases size. So can you talk a little bit more to that potential contradiction, or maybe that's, just a myth?
I do think it's a myth. I think that there's lots of ways of putting universal design features into a house without wasting space, like rimless showers. That doesn't take up any extra space, or having a bedroom on the first floor or in the kitchen. having a drawer, a washing machine, dishwasher, instead of having it open out, which is more difficult for people that are challenged physically, or having cabinets that open more as drawers than at the typical way. So I think a lot of the things, the aspects of universal design are very possible in a small house, and I think that it adds to the saleability. If you have things that look like hospital bars and things like that, I think, you know, it's going to detract from the house. But a lot of these things are very are not that visible, and I think it will raise the value of the house. And incidentally, you know, just talking about smaller houses, I have seen a trend just when I started writing about small houses with prefabulous small houses, that there's a real trend. People want a smaller, cozier, more efficient house. And I think a lot of them, particularly the younger generation, is they think all this stuff is just a waste and they want to live more minimally. And so I think that this trend of smaller houses is just growing. I have just seen, this is my 9th book, and I have had so much attention to this book, and the sales were enormous even before the book came out. So I think that there's a lot of interest. You can see the interest in the tiny house movement. There's lots of things on television about it, and books that are selling very well about tiny houses. And I think people are just fascinated with the idea of living a little bit smaller. And so maybe everybody doesn't or can't live in a tiny house, but they can live in a small house. And so I think that this is just a growing trend, and it's just going to be larger as, you know, as time goes on.
Speaking of like talking a little bit about the structural design, you know, what are your thoughts, or have you seen any type of shipping containers homes being incorporated as smaller homes or right-sized homes?
I have seen them, and they have been in prior books. I'm not a huge fan of them. It's very difficult to insulate them. The integrity of the walls becomes challenged when you have to put cutouts for windows and doors. And so you need somebody who's really skilled in doing this and in metal work. So it would not be my favorite type of house. The ones that I've seen done are very attractive, and they've been well done. And so for anybody that's interested in doing that, I just think there's a lot of other prefab methods that are more efficient and just easier and more efficient, just more efficient ways to build.
What, as far as modular housing goes, you know, what are some of the modular companies that you recommend?
Well, it depends on the location. There are some wonderful modular companies, a lot of them on the East and the West Coast. I've profiled a lot of those in my books, and so anybody that's interested in, I have a resource guide at the back of all of my prefab books, and it tells you who the manufacturer is, who the builder is, and all of the companies that I write about are companies that I feel really comfortable with. They all are doing great jobs and efficient jobs, and so I would recommend doing that. It would be difficult for me to pick out companies in every state. You know, they're scattered around.
Just in researching this, have you seen what kind of numbers have you seen as far as floors on square footages for homes? You know, on how small they can get. Have you noticed anything, or any, you know, looked into any kind of different numbers across the country?
You mean, are you talking about the size of the house?
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of municipalities have a floor on how low it can be.
Yeah, I think I think it really depends on the area. As I said, there's a house in Sharon that's 1,005 square feet. So I'm sure he checked on that. He had a very good architect, and I think that for anybody that is interested in building a small house, they do need to check with the local municipality and find out what their rules are. I don't think that it's a problem. Um, Most of these houses are within normal range. I think that one little tiny house that I showed you in Yerba, Florida, was particularly small and would not be allowed in a lot of uh, locations. It just so happens that was kind of a historical area where there were small houses, and so it was possible to build such a small house. But again, I think it depends on the local area. I didn't hear from anybody that that was a problem in any of these houses trying to
Right.
get trying to get to meet code.
Good. Well, that is the end of our questions. So I guess just real quick before we wrap up, where can people learn more, reach out to you, or find your book if they'd like to get it?
My book is really available any place that books are sold. It's sold in a lot of independent bookstores as well as Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And my email is up on the screen, so if anybody needs to email me, they can. I also write some articles for Forbes, so a lot of the information about energy efficient and appliances and techniques, or I write about, and they can just check Forbes.com and my name, um, and and there's a host of information out there about small houses and prefab.
Um, yeah, great. Thank you so much, Sherry. And I just wanted to second that. I've got actually 2 or 3 of your Forbes articles right now on backlog that I need to read, that I'm excited to read. So I've been trying to follow those. So yeah, I make sure to check those out. And yeah, thank you so much for your time and for going through this with us. I know this is your second time here, so hopefully maybe we'll have you back for your next book.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. And
All
thank
right.
you to everybody that came to the webinar.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks again, everybody. Stick around here for the giveaway, but for now, we're going to end this session and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.